My research title is the Comparative Research on Coping of Cyber Violence and Psychological Variables for Middle School Students. Let's see the contents. First, introduction. Second, methodology. Third, results. 4, discussion. Introduction. Background. Cyber violence as a social issue is being highlighted as of late due to the majority of middle school students using smartphones and social networking services. Thus, to prevent cyber violence from beginning early, research for early middle school students on coping methods towards cyber violence is required. This study focuses on the relationship between coping methods towards cyber violence and the psychological variables, along with social support, while looking at the differences between genders and attempts to build a intervention and prevention program based on the results. Methodology. Study design. This study is a descriptive survey study on the relationship between coping of cyber violence by middle school students and the psychological variables and social support received from the peers. Research subjects and data collection. Using the G-Power 319 program, the statistical significance of the study was alpha is 0.05 and the statistical power of the study was 1 minus beta is 0.80 for the effect size of 0.25. The result of G-Power 319 was 159 subjects. 280 students of this study were collected, excluding the responses filled out without effort and the meaningless outlier responses. Survey data on the total of 259 students were collected. Materials. Coping of cyber violence. After modifying the measurement tools on the coping with cyber violence, 3 nursing professors complemented and fit the variables for the purpose of this study. The Cronbach alpha value was 0.89. Social support. The 12 Likert attribution questions 5-point scale was used to create questions pitted towards middle school students. These questions were reviewed and complemented by 3 nursing professors to fit the purpose of this study. This study's Cronbach alpha value was at 0.89. Methods of analysis. The data collected was analyzed using the SPSS Win22 program and the general characteristics, the same size, percentage, mean, and standard deviation of the students, and the cyber violence coping methods were analyzed in this manner. Differences between the general characteristics and the coping methods of cyber violence were analyzed via t-test, chi-squared test. In addition, the relationship between coping methods of cyber violence were analyzed via Pearson's correlation coefficient. Results. General characteristics. This study collected survey data on 280 middle school students in City A and received 265 responses for a response rate of 94.6%. Excluding the responses lacking effort and the meaningless responses, a total of 257 subject data was used. The average age of the students was 14.3, with 127 male students and female students. The coping of cyber violence according to gender of subjects. After analyzing the subjects and the differences in coping methods towards cyber violence, a frequency analysis identified that there was a significant differences in methods. In addition to identify the differences between methods by genders, a chi-square test noted that there was a significant differences in 8 different methods between genders. The coping of cyber violence according to gender of subjects were as follows. The relationship between cyber violence coping methods and psychological variables and social support. In the situation of cyber violence and technical defense, coping methods, active response, perpetrator attribution, social support had a statistically significant positive relationship, and victim attribution had a negative relationship. Thus, it can be concluded from the results that as one uses technical defense, more social support is increased. This tells us that the victim is more likely to believe the cause of cyber violence is not the victim, but the perpetrator. For using the evasion coping methods towards violence with victim attribution, there was a significant positive relationship. However, there was a negative relationship with perpetrator attribution and social support. This leads to the conclusion that an evasion method approach to cyber violence will lead to lower social support, and thus the victim is likely to attribute the cause of cyber violence to the victim himself or herself instead of the perpetrator. The correlations on coping of cyber violence, psychological variables, and social support for middle school students were as followed. Discussion. For the subjects of this study, after studying the differences between males and females, it seemed that male students were more likely to get involved in direct attack, 11.3%, and direct response, 10.5%. Female students were more likely to be involved in using active response, 10.9%. Technical defense, 9.3%. Disregard, 8.2%. Direct attack, 7.4%. After analyzing the relationship between response methods towards cyber violence, the psychological variables, and the social support, there seems to be a tendency for the victim to attribute the root cause of cyber violence to himself or herself when the victim uses passive responses, disregards, and evasion. Therefore, there needs to be an intervention education program teach the victims of cyber violence otherwise. This gives us the conclusion that victims who utilize passive response, disregard, and evasion require a prevention in education program to strengthen social support and provide intervention to actively respond against cyber violence. This study confirms the differences between responding to cyber violence by genders in middle school students, along with the relationship between responses to cyber violence, psychological variables, and social support. This study found meaningful results which led to the conclusion that a catered education program for cyber violence victims that utilize passive responses, disregard, and evasion to strengthen their social support is necessary to provide effective coping methods and responses toward cyber violence. My research references are as follows. Thank you for listening my presentation.